So I'll talk about the science of justifying non-economic damages, emotional distress, and invisible pain compensation. That's what you're here for. Now, for the logistics, what you'll want to do is, in order to see my screen fully, you'll want to click on View at the top and put on speaker and put on full screen. That way, you'll be able to see my screen fully and you'll be able to follow all the slides, which is definitely desirable. Now, so give you a chance to do that. And if you want to get my resources after the presentation for how to justify non-economic damages, emotional distress, there'll be a poll at the end, but I would also recommend that you go to the link beneath my name, tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. And you can put in your information to get the resources, which would be a copy of my book, a copy of these slides, and some legal cases from cases I worked on and cases I'll talk about of actually how do you use the science of not justifying non-economic damages. So I put the link in the chat. You can click on that and enter your information there. Okay, so hopefully that's clear enough. Now, what we'll be doing today is obviously talking about this stuff. So how I will structure the presentation is that I will talk through the basic principles of the science of justifying non-economic distress, invisible pain compensation, emotional distress, and how you can use that to justify non-economic damages. So I'll talk through some basic principles. I'll give you a chance to ask questions. We're not a large crowd here, so you're welcome to come off mute if you have any questions that you want to ask, or you can ask them in the chat. And there'll be opportunities for those questions and answers. Then I will go through some actual cases, and you'll see some cases and how they work. So I'll go through. I participate in those cases as an expert witness. I do expert witness work on how to justify non-economic damages. And so I'll talk about those cases, talk about through the lens of an expert witness report. So I'll screen share that and we'll go through those cases pretty thoroughly. So that'll be another element of the presentation. So you'll actually see real life situations of where this methodology has been used. We'll have some polls and some breakout sessions throughout as well. So you can anticipate that. All right, without further ado, let's talk about the basic principles. So key topics: understanding invisible pain, emotional distress, challenges in the typical approach to invisible pain and emotional distress, which is subjective evaluation, introduction of a objective science-based quality metric in legal evaluations, and some real-world examples, and then strategies for presenting quality in court. So that's going to be the structure of the presentation. That's what you can anticipate. So let's talk about non-economic damages, the principles involved. So we have emotional, of course, emotions like intense sadness, grief, anger, anxiety, panic attacks are an expression of these emotions that you'll often see. We also have some cognitive elements of non-economic damages, of negative thoughts and rumination and difficulty concentrating, brain fog. You might have also heard of it as that. So all of those are forms of pain and suffering that people experience in that we can talk about in terms of non-economic damages.
And now it is time. Okay, well, enjoy.
Oh, hey, make sure to keep yourself on mute when you join. Thanks. So, physical components of non-economic damages. So we talked about the emotional components, physical components that you can talk about to the jury: headaches, muscle tension, sleep disturbances, fatigue, GI issues, hair loss, and chronic pain. So Chronic pain is a big one, and I listed it in the end just because I want to chat a little bit about it. Chronic pain is often one of the biggest issues with non-economic damages. That's invisible and hard to quantify, but very relevant and stressful for people. It causes a lot of suffering and going back to the emotions, anxiety, anger, and so on that's caused by chronic pain. But all of these other issues are also not great. Headaches, muscle tension, sleep disturbances, fatigue, GI issues, hair loss, and so on. And just like the emotional and the cognitive elements, each of these can be quantified in a monetary way when you are requesting compensation for your clients. Impact on life, so personal life. Strained relationships, social withdrawal, professional life decreased job performance, more absenteeism, overall quality of life is reduced pleasure and satisfaction, and the risk of major mental health conditions like MDD, major depressive disorder, PTSD, and so on. So those are the kinds of impacts you can talk through, and they all lead to the underlying emotional damage, emotional claims. So this is not something you can quantify in strained relationship. So that's not something you can say, well, it's a strained relationship. That's therefore I ask for emotional compensation. But because of the strained relationships, you have anxiety, or your client has anxiety, or grief, or loss, or something like that. And then you can claim the consequence of that, loss of companionships. Social withdrawal, similar. Decreased job performance, increased absenteeism to the extent that they are not reflected in wages, which is, of course, economic damages. That can, all of those can impact one's physical health and emotional health and so on. So, though that's what I mean by non-economic damages. So let's talk a little bit about issues with traditional methods of quantifications. So traditional subjective evaluation methods. A big problem is lack of standardization. So how are typical methods? What are the typical methods? The typical method is that the lawyer will describe the symptoms of the plaintiff to the jury. You may have the plaintiff understand to describe her or his own symptoms, but that's not quantifiable, right? So there's no standardizations. Like it depends on your rhetorical skills and the paint and the picture you can paint. And even regardless of the picture, you don't know what the jury has in its mind. It's whether they're going to award $10,000 for someone suffering from PTSD, or they're going to award $1 million for someone suffering from PTSD, because the jury doesn't know. Well, what does the jury know about what PTSD feels like? There's no scientific basis for these evaluations, and lawyers just can't come up with a scientific basis on the spot. They can talk, they can have a professional therapist there to say, yes, this person suffered from PTSD, but they can't actually say, therefore, this means that she should be rewarded, she should be compensated with X amount of money. And consistent criteria. So you can have different lawyers spinning different stories about what it means for someone to have PTSD, emphasizing different things. And so there's inconsistent criteria. Variability, lots of variability when you're just sharing stories, right? When you're emphasizing different things. It's dependent on rhetorical skills. So how skilled you are rhetorical to convince the trier of fact, whether it's the judge or the jury, most often it's going to be the jury, sometimes the judge. That demonstrates the need for objective and reliable methods, not dependent on the rhetorical skills of you and the defense lawyer, or if you are the defense lawyer of the plaintiff. So 80% of my work is for plaintiffs and 20% is for defense. And so that's kind of, I've worked with both, and I'll give case studies, examples from both. Variability. Let's talk about variability in individual experiences. You'll have a lot of personal differences with diverse emotional responses to similar events. Your clients can have stronger or weaker emotions, and The juries might have stronger or weaker emotional responses, especially they might have trouble emphasizing if they don't understand what it means to have PTSD or what it means to have chronic migraines caused by something. Influence of personal history and context. So somebody might have some personal history, some context that you can't account easily for in asking for appropriate compensation. Cultural factors. There's definitely cultural variation from different cultures in expressing distress, different coping mechanisms and social and other forms of support systems. That shows the need for a more scientific approach as well. So, for objective measures, scientific approaches can incorporate quantitative metrics. They can ensure reliability across cases, and the legal implications is that they will meet the Daubert standard for when you're having an expert who's talking about how to actually quantify this non-economic damage and enhances the credibility in court, therefore. Now, at this stage, let me ask a polling question. So you should all be able to see polls and you should be able to answer questions in the polls. So please answer these questions. How often do you handle cases involving non-economic damage claims? Please choose an answer. What is most challenging to convey about mental anguish? Choose an answer. And how confident are you in traditional subjective methods for evaluating distress? Please go ahead and answer the polls. I see most people answered. I'll give folks 10 more seconds, make their voice heard. All right. So most of you handle non-economic damage claims frequently, so good to know where you're lying. And the most challenging things to convey about mental anguish seems to be the weight of the evidence is that's the internal symptoms, emotional and cognitive. That's definitely can be a challenge. And confidence, there's either neutral or not confident about traditional subjective methods for evaluating distress. Okay, good. Then you'll get some useful, valuable insights from this more effective methodology called the QALY approach to handling the stress. QALY stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year. So QALY, QALY, Quality Adjusted Life Year. It combines the quantity of life, how long somebody lives, and the quality of life, how good is their life, into one single measure. So how do you calculate QALY? One QALY is 1 year of life in perfect health for somebody controlled for their age and so on, their demographic characteristics. So somebody in perfect health at 20 is going to be different than perfect health at 50, but overall, that is going to be a QALY, a year of life in perfect health adjusted for demographic characteristics. 0.5 QALY is 1 year of life at 50% quality. So what does that mean? So for example, uh, if someone is blind, that's typically when you look at the evaluation, that's about 50% loss of quality of life compared to someone who is in perfect health and not blind. So if somebody is blinded by an accident of some sort, that would be something that results in 50% decrease in quality of life. And that can become evaluated and compensated. And we'll talk about how we can do that. Okay, good. So let's talk about the components of quality. The length of life is one component, so measured in years lived. Longevity. So that's longevity. How long is your life? How long are you actually living, right? That's kind of one measure of quality that's important. Or one component, I'm sorry, of quality that's important. How long you're living your life. So if you're spending 1 year blind, that's 1 year times 50%. So quality of life is the other component. What's your quality of life? Factors influencing quality are going to be physical health, mental health, and social well-being. So all of those elements influence the quality of life. So the formula for quality combines both. Length of life times quality of life gives you a clear numeric composite of quality, which you can then present to the trier of fact. How is quality derived in the first place? Where is this coming from? What is this methodology? It was developed all the way in the 1960s, so it's a very old methodology. It's over 50 years old, 60 years old by now, developed by health economists to assess the value of medical interventions. How worthwhile is it to make a medical intervention in terms of how many qualities are improved at what cost? So the evolution is that it was increasingly adopted by public health and health economists, including for policymaking and resource allocation, including by the US government, which we'll talk about. So it's increasingly used for policymaking, resource allocation of all sorts. It's a very well-known standardized methodology, and that makes it easier, much easier to pass muster with the judge for Daubert or Frye evaluations. Standard quality. So standard quality value in the US is $165,000 in 2025 and 2026. So it's the same amount for 2025 and 2026 from the last time I checked. So it's a standardized form. And let me pull up some data on this. Hold on. So I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see my screen. So you'll see this is the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. This is a document describing recent document for Health and Human Services. So Health and Human Services standard values for regulatory analysis. It's developed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. All estimates are reported constant 2023 dollars unless otherwise noted. So this is analyzing the benefits, costs, and other impacts of significant proposal and final rulemaking. So again, I talked about policy analysis and rulemaking. And so this is the estimates of a value of a statistical life. So that's what the estimates are. And you'll see the value of estimates here. Low estimate, central estimate, high estimate for 2025 and 2026. It's going to be pretty similar here. 13.2 million, 13.4 million. So you can, what you would do is you would take this number, 13.4 million, and divide it by the typical length of a human life, which is 80, and you'll get around 165,000. So the implication of this central estimate, and this is again very easy and relevant for you to use in court, you would present this in court. Let's say, here's a central estimate for the human Health and Human Services for the value of a human life. So placing a number on it, and then placing a number on each year of human life. So just divided by the average of life expectancy of 80 years or so. And you like obviously look up the latest average for your, so you'll want to, 80 years is a general estimate. You'll want to look it up specifically for your client. So if you have someone who's a woman, she's going to live a little bit longer than a man, for example. And so that you'll make that estimate and look at the demographics and so on. And then you could see, okay, how long is this person going to be expected to live? And how long will they be expected to live with injury? So if someone is going to be permanently injured or have a permanent mental health condition, then that will mean that you'll want to calculate how much will that detract from somebody's quality of life and for how long will that happen? And then you'll come up with an estimate out of the total value of their life, which is 13.4 million currently. So I know this might be a little complex, so let me just go through the math and then I'll ask for any questions. So basis for evaluation, typical value valued at 13,200 by the US government, average US life expectancy. The calculation is it's 13,200,000 divided by 80 years is about 165,000 per quality. So at this stage, I want to pause and take any questions about anything I've shared so far. I know we're getting into math, complex territory. I want to make sure everyone's comfortable, everyone's following. Anyone has any questions about any aspects of what we've talked about so far. So anything that I've discussed, I'll be happy to take any questions at this stage. You can put them into the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask away. 5 more seconds. Okay. Sounds like everything is clear. That's great. Going on. Let's talk about some examples of QALY loss. So here I'm going to go through QALY loss due to depressive symptoms. So question, how are the numbers justified for the various VSLs? So you're asking a question about and what is a typical life? Good. Getting some questions. Excellent. So let's go back to the sharing. So for mortality risk challenges, we adopt 6.1, 13.1, 19.9 million respectively. So that is the government adoption of the case. And you can see some links here about it. And here is the value per quality adjusted life year. So you can see estimates derived from it. So quality adjusted life years, government is using that obviously. To quantify the benefits from this approach, analysts multiply estimates of the changes in QALYs by a monetary value per QALY. So that'll be V QALY. Don't need to worry about that, just QALY is fine. So the guidelines detail HHS approach to estimating QALY to be designed to be consistent with VSL estimates, life expectancy data, measurements of age varying, and so on. So there's a lot of literature here in terms of how they actually make these estimates. Value of time, paid activities, value of time unpaid activities, underfunded mandates, and so on, and with a lot of links. So for those who are curious specifically how they came up with it, you can go through the document. You can go through the links here, and you can read up on exactly how the government determined its estimates of QALY. So, so that's for you, Gus. Wallace asks, what is a typical life? So that's the typical life in terms of the demographics. So you'll want to look at relevant actuarial tables. So let's say, if, looking at Maryland, how long do people actually live in Maryland? Like, what's the actual average age that people live in Maryland? Usually, you'll have differences for men and women and geography. You might have some differences based on race as well and ethnicity. So you can take a look at those and you can see how long a typical life will be and thus evaluate QALY based on that length of typical life. Okay, Jerry asks, interesting, quality of life is based on money. No. So to clarify, the quality of life is not based on money, but from a government and legal perspective, harms to the quality of life can be monetarily quantified. So that's the crucial thing. We're not putting the cart before the horse. Quality of life, for some people, is based on money, but quality of life is an independent metric. So just somebody has a certain quality of life, and the question is, how can you actually make that real for the trier of fact, for the jury, for anybody who is trying to express how much is a certain detriment to the quality of life worth or increase in the quality of life. And then the way that we express value, that value of quality of life is through financial terms. So money. You're welcome, Jerry. All right. Don't see any other questions coming in. So let's talk about an example study of QALY loss due to depression. By the way, I think I shared. So if you want me to send you a link to that document, make sure to put your information, the government document that quantifies the quality of life, make sure to put your information into tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. And this applies to people who are live. This applies to people for whom the program is being recorded. Just go there. I'll send you a link to the government document that actually justifies the quality of life calculation and how it changes per year. So the 165,000 was true as of 2025. It's going to be a little bit more now because they changed it due to inflation from 13.2 million to 13.4 million. It's probably going to be 166 or 67, something like that. All right, going on. So here's a study of G. and Lobetkin. Incremental increases in quality of adjusted life years associated with higher levels of depressive symptoms for US adults aged 65 years and older. So let's talk about this. Study overview. It analyzed data from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, of 3,600, just nearly 3,700 US adults aged 65 and over, from 2005 to 2011. And they examined the association between quality of life, QALY, and depression. So if somebody had depression, somebody didn't have depression, but otherwise everything was the same, controlling for comorbidities and so on. Measured through the standard value for depression, if they're since measuring depression, they're measuring it via the PHQ-9, Patient Depression Questionnaire, which is the highly standardized methodology for measuring depression. It's widely adopted. If you go to your doctor's office and you've ever gotten a mental health depression screening test, it's going to be the PHQ-9 pretty much always, unless they're doing something unusual and complex. It's just very standardized. Depression score severity categories: non-minimal at 0 through 4, mild is 5 through 9, moderate 10 through 14, moderately severe, and severe is 15 plus. The average QALY lived from the start of the study evaluation period for each depression severity category, so from 2005 to 2011. Non-minimal, people had 14 QALYs on average. Mild, 7.8 QALYs. So you'd lose nearly 50% of your quality of life when going from non-minimal depression to mild. So it might be somewhere from 2 to something like 7 or 8 on that scale. Then moderate, you lose even more of your QALY. So it's going somewhere like 11 or 12 on that scale. So from non-minimal to moderate, you lose something like 2/3 of your quality of life. Moderately severe to severe, you lose even more. You lose closer to 3/4 of your quality of life. So depression is pretty bad. So if you have a case where, as a consequence of some situation, somebody goes from none, no depression, to moderately severe slash severe, they'll have lost about 75% of their quality of life. And of course, if they go from mild to moderately severe and severe, they'll have lost something like 50% of their quality of life from what they previously were. And so this is how you would calculate QALY and their impact. So significant quality loss is quantified. So major depressive disorder, that overall, that's moderate to moderately severe to severe. So everything below, like moderate, moderately severe, severe, that's called major depressive disorder. So when someone is diagnosed with major depressive disorder, they would be in the moderate, moderately severe, or severe categories on the PHQ-9. That's how it's defined. And the major depressive disorder on average is a loss of 8.3 QALYs, 65%. So if you have a therapist who is able to say, my client has developed a major depressive disorder as a result of this incident, this situation, they'll have 65% loss of their quality of life. And you can calculate the math on that, which we'll talk about. Mild depression, by comparison, is 6.2 fewer QALYs, so 14 to 7.8, so 44% loss. So again, if you have a client who doesn't qualify for major depressive disorder, but goes from non-minimal to mild, that will still be a 44% loss. And the patterns are consistent across demographics and comorbidities. So controlling for the various demographics and comorbidities, the study found the patterns are consistent. Implication. Every year of major depressive disorder is a loss of 65% of QALY, results in $107,250 loss. So again, 165,000, which is the year lived in perfect health, if your client is in perfect health, times 65% of QALY lost is going to be 107,250, for which you can claim compensation and which you can show the jury and the judge clearly why you're claiming that compensation. And so if somebody had trauma and they developed major depressive disorder and their case has taken about 3 years to winding its way through the courts, they've already suffered something like $320,000 in damages. And then you need to get a therapist to say how long they can be expected to take until they recover. So if it takes them another 3 years to recover, that will add another $320,000 to the damages that they suffered. If the therapist says it will take them 10 years to recover, that will be $1,070,000 in damages. You can reasonably and appropriately and scientifically claim. And so this is how you would use QALY. So if some event brings about such a disorder, that's going to be the cost to the patient. Other studies provide similar assessments of QALY loss for other types of mental distress and physical injuries, and I'll show some of those studies and some of the results of those studies when I talk through some of the expert witness reports that I've written and tell you a little bit more about them. Other peer-reviewed studies. So that's not the only peer-reviewed study. It's good to rely on multiple studies when they're available. So another study by Unutzer of quality-adjusted life years in older adults with depressive symptoms and chronic medical disorders. Followed older adults for 4 years, found that depression is one of the worst medical conditions decreasing quality, ranking just below arthritis and heart disease. So if you think of this arthritis and heart disease and how bad they can be, if you can convince the jury that somebody caused somebody else to experience arthritis and how arthritis is obviously very painful, or heart disease, and then you could say, well, depression is just below that and above the large majority of things. Okay, what about this PHQ-9 and quality assessment? How do we actually know that PHQ-9 can compare effectively to QALYs? Well, there was a study of estimating QALYs based on PHQ-9 scores. Fortunately for us, peer-reviewed study. This is all Daubert, admissible, passable in evidence-based mental health. It linked analysis of PHQ-9, which is the standard evaluative mechanism for depression, and EQ-5D, which is a standard evaluative mechanism for evaluating QALY. So randomized control trials that administered depression screening tools and EQ-593L, which is the QALY evaluating tool, one of the most commonly used as instruments. It found that depression screening tools like PHQ-9 accurately corresponded to EQ-593L. So that validates the use of PHQ-9, the standard depression questionnaire, in assessing QALYs lost due to depression. So peer-reviewed research supports QALY analysis of depression. So that's kind of how you would make that connection if you are pushed by defense counsel saying, well, is PHQ-9 really a good assessment for QALY? Legal cases. It clearly can provide objective evidence for legal compensation. It demonstrates clinical importance and statistical significance. So we definitely have clear statistical significance on QALY. It helps lawyers use QALY to support claims for physical injury damage, emotional distress damage. It's an objective measure of mental and emotional harm, of non-academic damage. You can apply findings to enhance your case credibility and defensibility. And it's great for the Daubert standard. So definition, of course, of Daubert is legal precedent for expert witness testimony. There's also Frye. Daubert is more widely used. It's used by judges to assess reliability and relevance for expert witnesses. The criteria is testability. Theory can be tested. Peer review. That has been peer reviewed. Known or potential error rates are acknowledged with existing standards for the technique and general acceptance in the scientific or other expert community. QALY is great for that. It's testable. It's a testable metric in health economics that has been evaluated widely over the last 60 years. Peer review, obviously extensively peer-reviewed in academic literature. I mean, the government uses it, so definitely very useful. Error rates. There are standardized methods that minimize error rates, which is great. Established guidelines for QALY calculation in the peer-reviewed literature, so that's very helpful. And acceptance. It's broadly accepted in public health and health economics, increasingly in legal systems. For expert witnesses on QALY. So QALY, you don't have to have an expert witness if you can explain this stuff yourself and communicate it effectively to the jury. If you want expert witness testimony, QALY can provide quantifiable health outcomes with a clear framework for emotional distress and physical damage that's not going to be visible, not somebody who's coming in and paralyzed, obviously. Standardized approach ensures consistency. QALY shows rigorous scientific methodology. It simplifies complex health evaluations and helps the jury and the judge understand what's going on and put a clear monetary value on it. Okay. Now, before I go on, let's do another poll. Just curious about, before today, have you heard about the QALY? And then how valuable could this metric be? Were you surprised by the 65% QALY loss for major depression? Can you think of a past case where QALY could have changed the outcome? Besides depression, where do you see the most potential for QALY? How comfortable would you be explaining QALY to a jury right now? What's the biggest hurdle to using QALY? What's the most appealing benefit of QALY? How likely are you to explore QALY in a legal case? And who benefits the most from using QALY? Please go ahead and share your answers. I see about half of you participated. I'll give folks 15 more seconds. I know there are a number of polls here. Okay, let's take a look. So, for the large majority of people, QALY is new. Some heard about it, some are familiar, but large majority of people is new. Uh, Great to see that for over half of you, it would be very valuable, and not very valuable for 10%, and for 40%, somewhat valuable. Great. So surprised by QALY loss of 65%. 75% were surprised, and 25% were not surprised. Probably folks who are more aware of mental health and have some experiences with it in their uh, families or something like that. Can you think of a past case where QALY could have changed the outcome? So a third of cases where it could have changed the outcome, definitely. And then half, would say maybe. So that's great, great potential there. Chronic pain cases, definitely a big, big potential. And I'll talk about a chronic pain case as one of the case studies that I'll go through. And discrimination harassment cases, also definitely a big issue. And I'll talk about some discrimination harassment as well. Explaining QALY to a jury right now. So nobody would be comfortable. So either not comfortable at 55%, over half, or would need to significantly prepare 45%. Biggest hurdle to using QALY, explaining it clearly to a jury. Yes, it's something that you need to communicate effectively to the jury about. Legal acceptance is not, I haven't seen it be too much of an issue, but that's definitely can be an issue. The cost of an expert, obviously. Most appealing benefit of QALY is clearly providing objective and data-driven evidence. Good. Likely to use QALY in the future case. So a third of you are likely, and half of you would be maybe I need more info. Then who benefits the most from using QALY? Yes, overwhelmingly plaintiffs, but defendants can also gain some benefit, and I'll talk about some examples of plaintiffs getting benefit. All right. So now that we talked through QALY and its methods, I'm going to take any questions that you might have on the broad principles behind QALY before going on to the more in-depth case studies. So let's take some time and think about any questions that you might have about this topic, about the QALY methodology. Please go ahead, think about some questions, come off mute or put them into the chat, whatever is most comfortable for you. Okay, no questions so far. Give you 10 more seconds to enter any questions that you might have. Or no, there are some questions. Somehow missed them. Okay, good. Now they're coming through. Will we get your presentation in our inbox? Yes, so just put in your information into the chat, into the tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT, and that you will get a copy of the presentation. Absolutely. Next, how does the numerical score on the depression questionnaire translate to QALY value? So that's where, let me go back to that. So you basically see if it's major depressive disorder, that's 8.3 QALYs lost. And then that's 65% of the total QALYs of 100 of 14. And so you have 8.3%, 8.3 fewer QALYs. So it's 65% of 14. And then you just calculate 165,000 total per year of quality of life times 65% of how much quality is lost. So that's 107,250 loss. Let's see. The table. So, John, there are no tables listing quality values for various conditions. What you have to do is you have to look in the scientific peer-reviewed literature for each individual condition. And then there are going to be multiple studies, and you have to figure out your way through these multiple studies and see what is the quality loss for each individual condition associated in the peer-reviewed literature. And then from there, you can make that application to your case, where you need to say, okay, here is how long somebody suffered, and here's how long they should be expected to suffer with this condition. So I told you about, let's say if someone has been, if if an incident caused blindness, 50% loss of quality of life or so. And you can look at the exact literature and see what it is. But that would be the kind of estimation that you would make. So Mel asks, would you say that the opposing lawyer usually fights the number pretty hard? Is it rarely accepted the average life is worth around 13 million? I haven't seen opposing lawyers fight around the life because just because it's a US government statistic that's very clearly out there and they that is what is clear and what the government determined, the federal government. There's, not like any sort of, you haven't put your thumb on the scale for that, basically. It's a clear reference that the Health and Human Services determined. What I see people fight around mostly is this mild depression or moderate depression? How bad is it? Was the person not depressed beforehand, or did he have mild depression and now became moderate depression? That's kind of, and I'll give an example of that, where it's like hard to determine whether somebody had mild depression or moderate depression. Another question that people fight about is how long it will last, because there's a big difference between it lasting 3 years and it lasting 10 years. And so that's kind of another big issue where opposing counsel fights. Would the person who the quality score helps be a client who's unable to perform a job? Oh, so it's a client, if they're unable to perform a job, you can calculate the economic damages. And so here we're talking about non-economic damages. And so that's going to be where quality is going to be really helpful. Not the economic damages with ability to perform a job, but non-economic damages. Let's see. question about emotional distress cap. So I think you're talking about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of the disabilities. So the compensatory damages for emotional distress, mental anguish, and punitive damages are capped at a maximum of 300,000. And that's specifically for Title VII and ADA compliance. So it does not apply in the large majority of emotional distress cases. So where you have cases where you are limited by ADA, sure, if that's what you're suing under. But you'll have many, many cases. I mean, there's reasons that people give million dollar verdicts for all sorts of issues that don't have to do with the ADA. So I hope that's clear. This clarifies it, Andreas. All right. Don't see any further questions. Then let's get on to talking about some case studies. Let's take a look at an example of a case study. Of Ortega versus Nationwide. And so this is Rose Ortega versus Nationwide Children's Hospital case. So this is looking at a situation where somebody's rights were violated under ADA for disability discrimination. And in Nationwide Children's Hospital, by Nationwide Children's Hospital. So this is the doctor, Rose Ortega, who developed arthritis, and she received a medical accommodation as a result of developing arthritis on her thumb to not perform major tooth extractions. And she was able to perform other sorts of dental activities. But Nationwide Children's Hospital kept scheduling her for dental extractions, despite the fact that her ADA accommodation allowed her to not do major tooth extractions. And so it kept scheduling her, and sometimes she was the only one there, she had to take them on, and her situation was exacerbated over time, and she developed some mental health conditions as a result. So that's kind of the broad situation that we're dealing here. So my expertise covers discrimination and ADA, all sorts of employer discrimination, whether it's with having to do with disability or having to do with ethnicity, race. So Ms. Ortega was both female and Hispanic, and so that is part of my expertise, looking at bias and discrimination. And so this case, I talked about that. I looked at the bias and discrimination element, and I looked at the quality element of how much this was quantified. So here was a summary of key opinions. Opinion 1, failure to provide meaningful ADA accommodation, failure to engage in a good faith interactive process. So if you know about the ADA, the key is, did the employer engage in a good faith interaction process? And so basically, although a Nationwide Children's Hospital did formally grant Dr. Ortega an accommodation, the evidence shows that the accommodation was not effectively implemented in daily operations. And so this is all just provides evidence for that. Then next, discrimination in terms of disparate and worse treatment in workload and scheduling compared to white male colleagues, including those with accommodations. So worse treatment. So the evidence indicates that an NCH assigned Dr. Ortega a disproportionately heavy and physically demanding clinical workload while granting her fewer administrative hours than similarly situated colleagues, including white male dentists who had their own health limitations. Then retaliation for protected activity and contribution to a hostile work environment. Shows she engaged in multiple protected activities, including requesting and using ADA accommodation for basal thumb arthritis, reporting safety violations, and objecting to racially insensitive and sexually inappropriate conduct in the department. And this explains it. Then here we're getting to QALY, with NCH's decisions caused long-term chronic harm. And I'll show that through psychotherapy and psychiatry records from Holistic Wellness Solutions that show that as early as September 28, 2021, Dr. Ortega was suffering from clinically diagnosed general anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and unspecified insomnia disorder, with her intake explicitly linking these conditions to a very stressful and chaotic pediatric dental environment, panic attacks, insomnia, and escalating conflict over her workload and accommodations. So this is going to be the key for QALY. My expertise is not in being a clinical physician, of being a therapist, being a psychiatrist. Not my role to determine that. It's my role is to look at how groups behave and group decision making. That's my area of expertise, and what on average is the impact of on groups of individuals on average of certain mental health conditions, of certain physical health conditions. That is my role. So here, I am not basing this on my perspective. I'm basing this on psychotherapy and psychiatric records. So when I work with lawyers, I ask them to get me the patients. If we're claiming mental health, then they would get me the records that show that the patient had certain mental health conditions as a result of whatever incident they suffered. So subsequent holistic wellness notes through June 2023 continue to associate her anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances with worsening treatment by leadership, repeated violations of her hand restrictions, and the stress of ultimately needing to resign. Then she moved to Chicago from Columbus, Ohio, where I currently live and where the case took place. Psychotherapy records from her next psychiatrist, Complete Care Behavioral Health document persistent anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And so this is showing that this is not something that went away, it persisted. So this is the situation. Okay. And finally, here is the crucial part of my opinion on QALY. Using established QALY methodology and probabilities drawn from peer-reviewed longitudinal studies, moderate major depressive disorder is estimated to reduce quality of life by approximately 65%, which we talked about. Generalized anxiety disorder by 31%, and chronic insomnia by 17%. So when present together, what you do, I'll show you how to do it, is you multiply them by each other. These conditions result in an estimated 80% loss of a full QALY each year. So the 4-year period from late 2021 through late 2025, Dr. Ortega lost approximately 3.2 QALYs. Counting for life course and evaluations, she's expected to lose an additional 19.82 QALYs for a total lifetime loss of 23.02 QALYs. Applying the value of life adopted by the US Department of Health and Human Services, so this was a little bit higher, yields a monetary estimate of just over 3.9 million in non-economic damages that related solely to the mental health consequences of NCH's actions. So it doesn't include physical pain, hand impairment, stress, lost income, or other economic damages. So that's the crux of the QALY matter. And let's talk about how it was estimated. So I'm not going to go through the details on ADA discrimination and retaliation for the sake of time. Okay, so QALY methodology. You first provide an overview, talked about all the studies. So the studies here are cited in the works cited section in the expert witness report. And here's more citations for each of them of how quality represents 0.5. We talked about that. Health utility values underlying qualities are typically derived using instruments such as EQ5D, which we talked about. Cited the Gian-Lubetkin study. So here I talk about her diagnosis and trajectory, that Holistic Wellness documents that Dr. Ortega undertaken intake and evaluation describing severe work-related stress with diagnosis including generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and that she also had insomnia. So all of these cases show that in Chicago, she also had these health conditions. So far, she had MDD, GAD, and insomnia with no documented remission. Okay, let's talk about each of these individual conditions. Major depressive disorder. Multiple studies show that depression substantially reduces quality of life. I talked this through, you saw that information. 65% reduction. So utility retained with an active major depressive disorder is 0.35. So that means that you go from 1.00 QALYs to 0.35 QALYs, with the loss being 0.65. Then here's generalized anxiety disorder. So you look for reviews of GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. You look for the citations of them, and I'll send you this information so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and look for it yourself. It found that patients with GAD typically have EQ-59 utilities, showing an average 31% reduction in health-related quality of life compared with general population norms. So it's 31%. So again, major depressive disorder, that's 65%. Generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 31% reduction. Chronic insomnia. There have a couple of studies that show that roughly 0.17 to 0.29 decrement for chronic insomnia, depending on severity. It wasn't indicated whether Dr. Ortega had severe or not severe anxiety. So to be conservative and not deal with the Daubert challenge and counsel, I adopted the lower end of the range, 17% reduction in health. So how do you count them together? What you do is, here's the methodology, Prieto, Sacristan, and Brazier et al. When multiple conditions coexist, quality methodology generally combines utility decrements multiplicatively to avoid double counting. So we start at 1, representing perfect health. After applying the 65% loss for major depressive disorder, retained utility is 1 times 35, and so that's what's retained, 0.35 QALYs left per year. Okay, 31% loss for GAD on top of that yields 0.35, which is what we had here, and remaining 0.69, that's going to be 100 minus 31%. So she'll have 0.24 QALYs, 24.15 QALYs left after accounting for GAD. What about insomnia? So there's 17% loss for this. So 0.83 is what's retained, which is approximately 0.2004. So when MDD, GAD, and insomnia are active, Dr. Ortega remaining utility is approximately 0.2, implying a quality loss of approximately 80% per year. In other words, during years when all three disorders are fully active, she's functioning at roughly 1/5 of full health, which is consistent with the severe multi-domain impairment described in her psychiatric records. Okay, what about persistence over time? there is research on how likely each symptom is to persist over time. For major depressive disorder, there was a study that followed individuals with MDD and found that about 50% recovered within 3 months, 63 within 6 months, 76% within 12 months, and roughly 20% had episodes lasting more than 21 months. And there's going to be multiple recurrence episodes. So given that Dr. Rose Ortega's depression already persisted for more than 4 years with ongoing occupational stress and comorbid anxiety and insomnia, she belongs in the more chronic, difficult to remit segment of 20%, with giving her a high likelihood of experiencing ongoing depression symptoms over her remaining lifetime. To reflect this while incorporating some chance of remission, I make a conservative estimate that the probability that her depression is clinically significant in a future year at about 60%. And so here is some of the evidence for which this is providing the base for that. So the expected quality loss, annual loss is 0.39. So implying an expected remaining utility of 0.61. So that is how you calculate how long something will persist. For generalized anxiety disorder, in one 12-year study of anxiety disorders, only a minority of individuals with JD achieved sustained recovery. Comorbid depression significantly reduced rates. So I estimate conservatively that the probability that JD is clinically significant in a given future year is 70%. So the higher estimate compared to MDD reflects the studies cited above showing JD's higher likelihood of persistence. So we have this likelihood of 0.217 loss per year, implying an effective retained GAD utility of 1 minus 0.217 or 0.783 as a result of GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. For insomnia, Morin found that 46% of individuals with insomnia at baseline still had insomnia at all 3 annual trips. The remission occurred in 54%, but 27% of those relapsed. And we have another study that 59% of those with full insomnia syndrome remained symptomatic after 5 years. So here it would be reasonable to estimate around 60% given the existing research. And so here we see the combined expected QALY remaining after insomnia, if it's just insomnia by itself, is 0.898. Using the probability weighted retained utilities for after the trial is over, I treat, or in the future after her condition starts to recover, we treat the effective MDD retained fraction as 0.61, that's major depressive disorder, the effective generalized anxiety disorder retained fraction as 0.783, the effective insomnia retained fraction as 0.898. And so you calculate the remaining fraction multiplicatively. So you see, starting at 1, after accounting for MDD, the amount of utility she has left in her life is 0.61. Then after accounting for generalized anxiety disorder, that's her remaining utility times 0.783, approximately 0.4776. Counting for insomnia, that's going to be 0.476 times 0.898, approximately 0.4289. So the expected loss is going to be on any given year as she starts to recover is going to be 57% of her QALY or 0.57. So now, over the past 4 years, her loss is 80% of her QALY, 0.8 QALYs, times 4 is 3.2 QALYs. For the future period, use a life expectancy of 34.7 additional years at age 47, together with a combined expected annual loss of 0.5711 QALYs. And you multiply those together, 34.7 times expected loss of 0.5711 QALYs, approximately 19.82 QALYs. So the total is going to be 23.02 QALYs. So the past is going to be 3.2 QALYs, that's 544,000. For the future quality loss, that's going to be 3.3 million because of the longer time frame. So the total requested sum is just over 3.9 million. And so here are interpretation and scope of the quality estimate and going on through each of these points and limitations, open questions, and conclusion. At this stage, I'll be happy to take any questions about this specific case study that you might have. Don't see any questions. I'll give folks 5 more seconds for any questions you might have. So the usual defenses of the defendant, Wallace asks, would be arguing that, she had, did she have depression earlier? And was this depression really caused by the treatment at the hospital, like trying to break the link between the mental health conditions and the cause of the incident? That's kind of one. The other is challenges about how long it will take her to recover, because that's crucial for the financial payments. So challenging that, hey, it will, how do you know it will take that long to recover? And so that's, another challenge area of challenge that I've heard from defense lawyers. Correct, John. In discrimination case, you first have to identify a mental health condition caused by the conduct and then determine the quality value. There is no quality value for simply being the subject of discrimination because for some people, it might just roll off their back. They might be like, well, whatever, someone's being a jerk to me, someone's being racist to me, I will do something else with my life. And some people might not experience that as something that causes them distress. For this case with Rose Ortega, she experienced very significant distress as a result of the discriminatory treatment that she experienced, where she received worse accommodations than similarly positioned physicians, white male colleagues, and her even ADA was not honored, in terms of the ADA accommodation was not honored in terms of the actual accommodation that was promised to her and that was actually given. So she developed a condition as a result, and that's what you want to evaluate. You're welcome, John. Glad that's helpful. Other folks, other questions? All right. If no questions, let's go on to another case. So I'm going to give an example of an injury case. Now, so what happened here? So this is Walter Downs versus Downs Racing LP, Mohegan Commercial Ventures in Pennsylvania. So right next to Maryland. So Walter Dunn, who is a veteran, who has in the past suffered from PTSD and depression, and he was treated for PTSD and depression. But he, by this stage, has gotten his life together, and he was generally either asymptomatic or very mildly symptomatic. He still had maintenance treatments, but he was treated at the VA, so we have a lot of his records. Oh, it's good records. And so he did not have too many symptoms. Like his doctors were really happy about his situation. He was happy that things were going fine. And so he's again veteran, like something like I think in his late 60s. Then he went to Mohegan Sun in Pennsylvania to the spa. After approximately 15 minutes in the steam room, he began feeling lightheaded, attempted to exit, but discovered the door was locked. So he could not get out of the steam room there. He received no instructions from spa staff regarding how to operate the steam room, safety procedures, or emergency exits. So he was unable to leave the steam room. He began feeling increasingly distressed. His girlfriend and bystanders unsuccessfully attempted to open the locked door. He lost consciousness, collapsed, and injured his head and body. And he was treated for heat exhaustion, mild head trauma, acute kidney injury due to dehydration. And the physical damage was not much. He recovered pretty quickly from that physical damage. But the problem is that it exacerbated his pre-existing psychological conditions, triggering strong PTSD, depression, and anxiety symptoms. So the analysis shows that Mr. Dunn's emotional and physical reactions during the spa incident were significantly influenced by his pre-existing psychological conditions. All of these issues with depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, stemming from his prior military experience. It's just notes to self. So this is the Word document, not the final PDF. This is why I have this notes to self. I prefer showing for the Word document because it's easier to click and highlight various elements. Post-incident, Mr. Dunn's condition deteriorated from a state of relative stability to one of withdrawal, suspicion, and psychomotor agitation. Dr. Fishbein, who was the medical expert who was hired by the plaintiff counsel to evaluate Mr. Dunn, he confirms that Mr. Dunn suffered from bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, anxiety, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. He concluded within a reasonable degree of medical certainty that the sauna entrapment caused an exacerbation of these conditions to such an extent that, according to Dr. Fishbein, the likelihood of his quality of life returning to a level he was experiencing prior to the events at the Sapphire Salon and Spa at the Mohegan Sun is less than 10%. So that gives us a clear numerical evaluation of the expected persistence of symptoms and how much quality of life he's expected to lose. And his girlfriend, Kathy DePhillips, Philippus confirms that he also had marked quality of life, more nightmares, flashbacks. She was present in the sauna with him, and as a result of all these changes, they actually ended up breaking up. But she still tested these changes to his personality. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of this case. And so I talk about the quality methodology, which you've seen before. I'm not going to go through it thoroughly. So it's the psychological impact of trauma. So here examining PTSD, bipolar disorder, anxiety suppression, exacerbation of pre-existing mental health conditions. So prior to the event, he experienced major progress. At the time of the incident, he achieved considerable progress in his mental health, indicating a relatively stable and improved quality of life to such an extent that his symptoms were nearly subclinical. So here I talk about the quality methodology, of course. So PTSD, I talk about the depression, PTSD. So I think I haven't talked yet about PTSD. A study on PTSD found the results in an average loss of 34% of people's quality of life. So here you can use that as a basis, just 34% of the quality of life. And here's a standard analysis. So for example, somebody losing 34% of their quality of life would lose 56,000 per year each year they have symptoms. And so here talk about compounding losses if they have both PTSD and worsening of depression. And so what I'm assuming here is that he had mild depression and then developed moderately severe depression, losing 42% of their quality of life, because it seems that he had fully or mostly recovered from his depression. And it seems like his PTSD was subclinical. And so I evaluated that they would lose 42% of their quality of life due to worsening depression. So that would be 45,000 of loss. So combined loss would be 101,000 per year of symptoms or 8,487 per month. So talk about impact, ongoing impacts, and so on. Right. So I talked about generalized anxiety disorder before. That's going to be 31% loss. Someone who has both anxiety and PTSD would lose 31% of their remaining quality of life. So we talked about that. So I talked through both scenarios. And that would be up for the trier of fact to determine, the judge or the jury, mostly the jury. This is another area that I think there was a question before of what are the usual defenses of the defendant. So the defendant can say that, well, did he really have completely subclinical depression? Maybe he had mild depression. And his medical records from the VA are unclear on whether he had mild depression or whether he had subclinical depression, meaning no discernible depression. And so I calculated both studies. If he had subclinical depression, experienced a deterioration toward moderately severe and severe, he would have lost 65% of his remaining quality of life. If it went from mild to moderately severe, he would have lost 42% of their quality of life. And so I calculate both scenarios for a total loss. If it is, if he went from mild, if he did have depression, mild depression, then he would lose $10,118 per month. If he had subclinical depression and went to moderately severe depression, he would lose 11,558 per month in quality of life equivalents. Now, bipolar disorder. The literature suggests that the harmful impact from bipolar disorder comes from the depression phase, which overlaps with the depression described above. So it would be inappropriate to factor bipolar disorder as an additional condition. So this is something just that you don't even need to wait for defense counsel to make this claim, that you can say this and this presents you more credibly to the judge and to the jury as saying, look, yes, his bipolar disorder was exacerbated, but really the bad part of bipolar disorder comes from the depressive phase, not the manic phase. And the depressive, that's according to the research. And so the depression is already accounted for in the major depressive disorder. So you don't want to double count it. That makes you more credible, and that makes your case more credible. How long can we expect the symptoms to last? So he already had a significant 28 months since the incident in the sauna, which lasted, and Dr. Fishbein said the prognosis for recovery is grim. The likelihood of his quality of life will return to a level he was experiencing prior to the events is less than 10%. So given his age of 68 currently and 69 by the expected trial conclusion, we can expect him to live to the average US age of 80, so 11 more years. Less than 10% chance of recovering. So then you do the math and you find that that will be a total loss of 101,373,140. And so here it's going to be the total loss if he went from mild, if he went from subclinical depression, if he went from subclinical depression to moderately severe, this would be the total claim. If he went from severe, if he went from mild depression to moderately severe, this would be the total claim. Obviously, you can see that makes a significant difference of 230,000, which is one of the reasons that defense lawyers definitely push on this issue. Okay. Happy to take questions about Mr. Dunn's case. I'm sure many of you deal not simply with discrimination, but with personal injury cases of all sorts. And this is a perfect illustration of personal injury cases. Give you a little bit more time to think about questions for personal injury. It doesn't seem like there are any questions. Great. Or no, somebody just asked a question. Can you combine depression with personal? Absolutely. I mean, this is a personal injury situation where he suffered from personal injury and he had depression. So as a result of that personal injury. So yes, absolutely. So what you'll want to, maybe you're asking about exacerbation of depression. So if somebody had a personal injury that exacerbated their depression, that is also, this is a case where it illustrates that he might have had mild depression or subclinical depression. Yes, exacerbation. So yes, so this is what I'm talking about with exacerbation. Let me show that again. In the case where Mr. Dunn moved from mild depression to moderately severe depression as a result of the sauna incident, the sum would be that we can request is reasonably justifiably 1.6 million. Because he had mild depression before, so he was not at perfect health. He was not at one QALY, in other words. And so you can't use one QALY as his baseline. You have to use the mild depression. And that's will be some loss. Then, if he did not have depression, if this is someone who was not depressed previously, or who had subclinical depression to the extent that his depression was fully controlled and he didn't have depressive symptoms, subclinical depression, then we can ask for, and it resulted in the same moderately severe depression, then we can ask for 1,830,000. So obviously that's a $230,000 difference. And so that will be the difference between exacerbation of depression versus instigation of depression. So is depression instigated by the incident or is it exacerbated by the incident? You're welcome, Jerry. Other questions? Okay. Doesn't seem like there are more questions, so I'll go on. So I talked about a couple of examples of mental health conditions. Let's talk about physical health, chronic pain, all of that stuff, disability. So this is a situation where Mr. Raymond Nolasco, he's a logistics specialist. He suffered severe polytrauma in a motorcycle collision, including various conditions with wrist fractures that required open reduction, internal fixation, clavicle fracture, right-sided rib fractures, pneumothorax treated with a chest tube. So pretty bad. And so this was in October. In March and April, we see that some of his condition has persisted with persistent pain, vertigo, sleep disturbance, potential PTSD, and weight gain. And so Dr. Reed, and this is not a therapist, and so she could not diagnose PTSD. She said he might have PTSD, so we're getting him evaluated. But she calculated a disability profile. Dash 56, Pain Disability Questionnaire 93, and ACEs 55, which are all disability evaluations. So standard disability evaluations, which all signal moderate to severe functional loss and pain interference. So limited recovery within 6 months indicates that Mr. Nolasco faces significant lifelong loss of health with only limited recovery potential, substantial ongoing medical expenses, and profound quality of life reductions attributable to the crash-related injuries. Very typical case. You see, obviously, going on the highway, you see these signs, motorcycle crash, call this lawyer, right? Very classical personal injury law case. But how do you actually quantify these to the jury? Especially these are not visible conditions, right? These are not like something you can easily see. You can't wheel in the guy on a gurney and show him being on a gurney. Okay. So, talk about quality methodology. I'll talk about that. This is all just my expertise. Good stuff. Quality methodology, explaining it, all of this stuff. US government standards. Okay, medical findings. So here, getting to the medical findings. Pain Disability Questionnaire got a score of 93 that places him in the severe disability category, signifying persistent, pervasive pain that interferes with self-care, work, and recreation. So he has bilateral wrist pain, heightened in the left hand, exacerbated by cold exposure, repetitive motion. Given that this is the current level of pain 6 months after the incident, further recovery is expected to be slight. Orthopedics. His primary trauma consists of bilateral comminuted displaced distal radius fractures. And so post-operative imaging confirms healing alignment, yet persistent arthritic irregularity in both wrists. The left thumb exhibits marked motion loss at multiple joints, so limited to 35 degrees, 28 degrees, and so on. So this is all taken just from the medical records. So all of this stuff showing that basically he has significant diminutions in his ability. During the assessment, Dr. Reed found disabilities in the arm, shoulder, and head, DASH score of 56, which indicates moderate disability, and American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeon's AC score of 55, consistent with moderate functional loss in the shoulder complex. So he's gone to physical therapy for 6 months. His current state of recovery after 6 months means that further recovery is likely to be limited. He also has persistent, I think somebody had a question. Where can I obtain the pain questionnaire mentioned? So I will email you if you put your information into the link, or we'll also have a poll. So if you put your information into the link, that I shared, I'll email you the study. And from the study, I'll email you my expert witness report. And so you can look up the links to all of these questionnaires from the expert witness report. Okay. So within 2 months of the crash, he developed positional dizziness. So positional vertigo on the left posterior canal, and there were repositioning maneuvers produced partial but incomplete symptom relief. So this is a vertigo episode. Next, sleep disturbance. So we talked about insomnia as an issue, frequent startling awakenings. The nocturnal hyperarousal pattern exacerbates daytime fatigue and pain sensitivity. And finally, PTSD. He is currently undergoing evaluation. So it's not something I can say or the medical doctor can say. So in the meantime, Gus asked, do the AMA guidelines and impairment ratings come into play in your evaluation? If the medical doctor who is in charge of the evaluation says so, then yes. So I'm not a medical doctor. I look at the medical report, and then using the medical report, I can quantify the non-economic damages that the medical report indicates. So all of this stuff is information that the doctor provides. And so to the extent that the medical doctor provides and references AMA guidelines and impairment ratings, yes. To the extent that the doctor does not, then no. And if the defense counsel raises these issues, sure, he would raise them with the doctor who's also testifying, not me, because I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical expert. My expertise is specifically on quantifying the non-academic damages, the chronic pain, the wrist impairment, the vertigo, all that I can quantify and put a number on it. Functional impact analysis, all of the problems, activities of daily living, vocational restrictions, overall bad stuff. So let's talk about how to evaluate all of these chronic conditions. Multiple cohort studies converged on mean utilities between 0.4 and 0.5 for adults reporting severe daily pain. So basically, you're losing 50 to 60% of your quality of life if you have severe daily pain. So something like one found 57%, another 64%. I am using the more conservative estimate. I always try to use the more conservative estimate, as I mentioned before, because that can give more credibility to the case, more credibility to you as the lawyer, more credibility to the client. It helps the judge accept the standard. It helps the jury be more confident. I cite both. I like in my as I do here, and in talking to the jury, I would cite both. Like, okay, this is what this study shows. This is what this study shows. I'm going to be conservative and use the more conservative assessment so that I'm not making an exaggerated claim. So, for the 6 months from the injury until the PDS assessment, Mr. Nolasco lost 57% of his quality of life due to pain alone, not counting other losses. Okay, what about going forward? So research shows that chronic pain is difficult to cure once it has lasted as long as Mr. Nolasco's. Standard of care best practices have shown some promise, with the one study finding that this intervention significantly improved quality for those with chronic pain, from 0.34 quality to 0.44 quality in 1-year follow-up. So we can expect that his pain may decrease from losing 57% of his quality of life to 47% of his quality of life due to chronic pain over the next year. Now, unfortunately, half of those with chronic pain still report chronic pain over the next 11 years. After 11 years, any recovery is unlikely. So we should expect that Mr. Nolasco has a 50% chance of recovering over the remaining years of his life from pain. So he will lose 23.5% of his health due to chronic pain in this period of 43.2 years. So a lot of life to live with this much pain. So this is just the pain element. Wrist injury. So we have the DASH score, we have the AC score. And here is some research showing that EQ-59 utilities in patients with head and arm injuries climbing from roughly 0.71 at 3 months to 0.75 at 6, and then 0.81 at 12 as the median DASH falls from 30 to 17 to 12. Now, his DASH score is 56, so pretty high, suggesting that at the time of the evaluation, he might have had his quality of life reduced by at least 35% over the 6 months prior to Dr. Reed's examination due to the wrist injury. The same study suggests that Mr. Nolasco's injuries, which are substantially more severe than the typical study participant, will improve over time, if slowly. So here is the calculation per the study of 9 months, 3 months, 9 months, and so on. And so here we have evaluation per quarterly period of how we can expect this wrist injury to improve. After that point, while all patients treated non-operatively reported minimal or no symptoms upon final follow-up, 57% of patients treated operatively noted symptoms. He was treated operatively, so he belongs in the latter category. If his symptoms did not go away after 5 years, we can assume they would be permanent. So he has a 57% chance of having a quality loss of 19% for the remaining 42.8 years of his expected life. Total expected loss from wrist injury for each of his remaining life years after initial recovery would be 11%. And so here that's going to be 23% for the chronic pain, and then 11% loss of his remaining quality of life. Vertigo. So he developed vertigo, which sucks, apparently. I haven't developed it, but it's apparently pretty bad. So he studied 175 patients with acute vestibular disorders. They cause an EQ-5 measurement of 36%, so pretty bad in terms of just suffering from vertigo, not being able to stand up, and so on. Another study is even worse, 47%. So again, I'm going to use the more conservative estimate, which you should always try to do to reduce skepticism. So treatment. He was responsive to treatment. Over the course of the next 6 months, as Mr. Nolasco goes through symptoms, he likely recover full functionality. And so we can anticipate over the course of the next 6 months, as he goes through treatment, after 5 sessions, because the study showed that after 5 sessions, nearly all patients recover much of their previous functionality. And so over the next 6 months, he'll lose another 18% of his quality of life due to vertigo, but this will not be persistent. It will not last for 42 years. It will just last for another 6 months. Sleep disturbance. So this is a serious issue. We talked about insomnia before. So EQ-59 loss of 0.17 for moderate insomnia, 0.33 for severe insomnia, and so giving the more conservative estimate of 17% of his quality of life. So long-term cohort studies show insomnia often becomes chronic, with 40% of cases persisting for at least 5 years. So 40% of those with insomnia cases persist. So over the remaining 44.2 years of his life, there's a 40% chance that Mr. Nolasco will lose 17% of his quality of life. That's a total expected loss of health of 7% over that period. PTSD. So we know a lot about PTSD. I'm not going to go through it thoroughly, but basically we can anticipate if he does have PTSD, which we need a therapist to diagnose, there's a 54% chance he will recover anytime from 2 to 10 years. Okay, quality evaluation. Let me go to a table that makes it more clear. Actually, let me talk this through. During the initial acute phase, October 2024 to April 2025, until he was treated. During the initial acute, he experienced at least the combined effects of severe chronic pain, leaving 43% utility, wrist injury, 65%, vertigo, leaving 64%, and insomnia, leaving 83%. So combining them multiplicatively means he had 15% of his quality of life during the treatment, during this acute period. initial acute and postoperative phase. So that equates to a loss of 0.43 QALY, which is 70,000. If he had PTSD, that would be 74,000. Going on, next 12 months. Recovery and rehabilitation. So we have chronic pain averaged, this is the next 12 months. Again, you remember that different studies showing that chronic pain recovers at a certain rate, wrist function recovers at a certain rate. So this is all counting these periods. Wrist chronic pain is expected to average a 52% utility loss, so leaving 48% utility, which is more than the first 6 months. Wrist function averages 28% loss, leaving 72% utility. So again, more than the previous 6 months. So you have to calculate for these sorts of injuries, you have to calculate that we can chronicle their different recovery rates over time. You have to calculate how much worse or how much better the patient is going to be over time in order to make a credible financial claim. Vertigo treatment, 9% loss, leaving 91% treatment utility. So here again, higher. Insomnia versus 83%, we have 93% utility. So here we have, instead of 15%, we have a total multiplicative effect of 29%. So this is how much he will lose over how much quality of life he will have over the next 12 months. And that's $116,000. Then the following 6 months. So we have following 6 months, calculate things the same way. That's going to be 36,000. And again, higher if PTSD. Then the big chunk of change is going to be the remaining lifetime. So persistent decrements are expected from chronic pain, leaving 67.5% utility, wrist injury leaving 89% utility, insomnia 93% utility, and he is expected to recover from his vertigo. So the rest of his life, he's expected to have 63.5% utility if PTSD is not present. That will be $2.5 million. Quality of life loss, again, 42.7 years, he would lose 15.6 QALYs. If PTSD is present, then it would be $22.6 million. And here's just a table summarizing all this stuff. So, questions about this case study? Okay, I don't see any questions. So let's get to the key takeaways. We're almost out of time, but we're doing quite well in terms of our timing. You have to understand mental anguish and emotional distress well in order to communicate to the jury effectively about non-economic damages. There are lots of challenges to subjective evaluation, and I hope I showed you what they are. I introduced you to the QALY metric and legal evaluation. I talked through some real-world examples, and I shared earlier some strategies for presenting QALY in court. Now, I'll be happy to send additional resources. I think I mentioned the link is going to be, and I'll do a poll as well, but the link is going to be tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT, which you can use if you're live or if you're recording it. So it's going to be a link to the slides, a copy of my best-selling book, The Blind Spots Between Us: How to Overcome Unconscious Cognitive Bias and Build Better Relationships of Relevance to QALY. And then free coaching for integrating these strategies into your work, and all the case studies that I've talked about today so that you can actually apply them practically. Just you'll see the expert witness reports, you'll see what they're like. And so you can go to the link and sign up there, or you can also answer the meeting poll. So please go ahead and fill out the final poll. How relevant was this topic? What's your biggest takeaway? And would you like to get the speaker's resources, which I just outlined to you? Please go ahead and fill out the poll. And while folks are filling out the poll, I'll be happy to take any remaining questions that you might have about any aspects of quality or anything else that we've discussed. You can come off mute if you'd like, or you can put your questions into the chat. Whichever is most convenient for you is great. Give 10 more seconds for any questions. Come off chat, come off mute, or put your question into the chat. Sounds good, Gus. But yeah, if you just answer yes in the poll, the organizers will send me your information or just put it into the tinyurl.com DA event information. Okay, I think we're ready. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that you attended this presentation. Does anybody from the Crucell, do you want to finish up or should I just finish up myself?
I can finish up for you. Thank you so much for your presentation today. It was wonderful, very informative. We'd like to thank everybody
Excellent.
for joining us today. And any last notes that you want to add? Do you want to add any last notes before I close up?
For me, I hope
Yeah.
everybody benefited, and I hope that you'll have very helpful, that you found this helpful. You're very welcome, John and Jerry. You're welcome. Glad it was helpful.
All right. Thank you again. I'm ending the meeting. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all.